The air in the Prescott family drawing room was as cold and still as a forgotten memory. Sunlight, thin and pale, struggled through grimy, floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a world of faded grandeur. It caught the dust motes dancing over furniture shrouded in white sheets, ghostly shapes of a life that had ended long ago. The scent of decay, a mix of damp wood and old paper, clung to the threadbare tapestries depicting triumphant hunts and lavish feasts, their vibrant colors now muted to shades of sorrow. This mansion, nestled in the Hudson Valley, was a Gilded Age tomb, a place where a prestigious name was the last remaining asset, and even that was being leveraged in the most desperate of transactions. The silence was thick and heavy, broken only by the low, strained murmur of men deciding a woman's fate as if she were a piece of the property they were about to lose. Seated in a high-backed chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, Eleanor Prescott tried to make herself invisible. At 22, she had mastered the art of taking up as little space as possible, a skill honed by a lifetime of quiet apologies for her very existence. Her dark, simple dress was a kind of camouflage against the opulent decay of her home, her sweet, expressive face set in a look of practiced resignation. Across from her, her father, Lawrence, gestured with a hand that trembled slightly, his voice a veneer of aristocratic confidence over a core of sheer panic. Beside him, her brother, Spencer, wore a familiar smirk of detached cruelty. They were selling a legacy they had squandered, and today that legacy included her. She kept her gaze fixed on a crack in the plaster, tracing its path like a map of her own fractured spirit, feeling the cold seep from the marble floor right into her bones. "The debt stands at $750,000, Lawrence stated, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. He cleared his throat and looked toward the third man, a figure who seemed carved from a different, harder stone. "I propose a different kind of settlement, an arrangement that benefits us both. I offer you my daughter's hand in marriage to clear the slate entirely." The words hung in the air, obscene and final. Eleanor felt them land like physical blows, each one a fresh crack in her already fragile composure. Spencer leaned forward, adding with a dismissive wave, "Think of it, Shaw, a Prescott bride. It's a small price to pay for what you're getting." He didn't even look at his sister. She was not a person in this room. She was a solution, a commodity, the final piece of furniture to be sold off to keep the creditors at bay. All eyes turned to Caleb Shaw. He was a man out of place in this mausoleum of old money, his large frame solid, his hands calloused from work, not soft from idleness. He said nothing for a long moment, his penetrating gaze moving from the desperate father to the sneering son. Then his eyes found Eleanor. She expected to see disgust, or worse, pity. Instead, she saw something that startled her. His expression was one of quiet, simmering indignation. He wasn't looking at a bargaining chip. He was looking at her, truly seeing the profound humiliation she was enduring with such silent, heart-breaking dignity. In that gaze, a silent vow was made. He saw the cruelty of the men who shared her blood and the unbroken spirit of the woman they were trying to sell. The transaction was no longer about money. It had become about something far more valuable. The car ride from the Prescott estate to Caleb Shaw's ranch was a journey through a silent, suffocating fog of uncertainty. Eleanor sat perfectly still, her hands clasped in her lap, watching the decaying grandeur of her ancestral lands give way to rolling hills and vibrant, meticulously managed fields. Each mile put between her and the cold, judgmental eyes of her family was a small relief. Yet each mile closer to her unknown future was a new source of terror. She was a piece of property that had been transferred, a debt settled. She expected to be treated as such, housed in some forgotten corner of his life, a constant, physical reminder of a distasteful business transaction. The ranch that came into view was nothing like her home. It was modern, sprawling, and alive with purpose, a world of clean lines and functional beauty that made her feel even more out of place. Upon their arrival, Caleb led her not to a servant's quarter or a modest guest room, but to the master wing of the house. He opened the door to a spacious suite with a large window overlooking the valley, the room filled with warm light and furnished with simple, elegant pieces. It was a room that breathed, that offered comfort instead of judgment. "I hope this will be suitable for you," he said, his voice low and even. He didn't touch her, didn't loom over her. He simply stood by the door, giving her space, his gaze direct and respectful. For a woman who had spent her life trying to be invisible, being seen in this way was both disarming and deeply unsettling. She could only nod. The word "thank you" caught in her throat, a foreign phrase in the language of her existence. In the days that followed, Eleanor existed in a state of high alert, a skittish animal in a new and unpredictable environment. She interpreted every kind gesture as a prelude to a demand, every quiet moment as the calm before a storm of cruelty. When a housekeeper brought her tea without being asked, she braced for a complaint about her idleness. When Caleb asked if she had slept well, she searched his face for a hint of sarcasm. Her mind was a prison built by her father and brother, its walls papered with insults and accusations. She remembered Lawrence once praising a dress she wore, only to later remark in front of guests how it was a shame such fine fabric was wasted on her frame. Kindness, in her experience, was merely a more sophisticated weapon of abuse, and she waited for the inevitable blow to fall. Caleb, however, was a patient man, accustomed to watching things grow. He observed her from a distance, noting the way she moved through his home as if she were a ghost, her footsteps light, her presence barely a whisper. He saw the genuine, unforced smile she gave the cook who praised her small but thoughtful help in the kitchen, and the gentle way she spoke to the dogs that followed her in the garden. These were not the actions of the spoiled, useless woman her father had implicitly described. He saw a deep well of kindness in her, a quiet strength that had somehow survived the drought of her family's affection. He found himself increasingly intrigued, not by the Prescott name, but by the gentle, wounded soul of the woman who bore it. One evening, he found her in his study, a room she had avoided until now. She was tracing the title of a book on soil rotation with a hesitant finger. Instead of asking what she was doing, he gestured to a set of architectural plans on his large oak desk. "I'm thinking of expanding the rose garden by the West Terrace," he said simply. "I'm not sure about the layout. What do you think?" The question hung in the air, so direct and unexpected that it momentarily silenced the chorus of self-doubt in her head. No one had ever asked for her opinion on anything more significant than the dinner menu. Hesitantly, she looked at the plans, her mind, so often a refuge from pain, suddenly sharp and focused. She pointed to a section, her voice barely a whisper, suggesting a curved path instead of a straight one to soften the landscape. Caleb leaned over the plans, studying her suggestion with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. He didn't dismiss it or patronize her. He considered it, his brow furrowed in concentration. "A curved path," he repeated slowly, tracing the line she had indicated. "Yes, that's better. It's much better. It feels more natural." He looked up and met her eyes, and in that moment she saw no judgment, no pity, no calculation. She saw only genuine agreement, a shared moment of creation. It was a small thing, a garden path, but it felt like the first solid piece of ground she had stood on in her entire life. A tiny, fragile seed of hope began to push its way through the compacted soil of her despair, and the feeling was so foreign it was terrifying. That night, sleep offered no escape. Eleanor lay awake, staring at the moonlight pooling on the floor, her mind a battlefield. Caleb's simple act of validation had thrown her into a tailspin. A part of her, A desperate, starved part wanted to believe in his decency, to open the door to the possibility that she was not the worthless burden she had always been told she was. But the voices of her past were relentless, whispering that it was all a trick, a more elaborate form of humiliation. They reminded her of every sneer from Spencer, every disappointed sigh from her father. How can you heal from wounds that you've been told you deserve? Sometimes it's so hard to accept a helping hand when all you've ever known is the fist. If you've ever felt that struggle, please consider subscribing. It helps us share more stories about finding the light in the darkness. The world outside the sanctuary of the ranch was not so kind. The whispers of the Hudson Valley elite soon became a roar of gossip. The story of the Prescott debt and its unusual settlement was too scandalous to remain private. In town, Eleanor became a subject of morbid curiosity, her name spoken in hushed, pitying tones or with cruel, dismissive smirks. They called her the bargain bride, the plus-sized payment. During a rare trip to the local market for supplies, she overheard two women, their faces pinched with feigned sympathy, discussing how tragic it was that Lawrence had to sell off his hefty daughter to a man like Shaw. Each word was a fresh cut, reminding her that even if she escaped her family, she could not escape the world's judgment. Caleb was not a man who engaged in gossip, but he was not a fool. He saw the way people looked at Eleanor, the subtle shifts in conversation when they entered a room. He noticed how she began to withdraw again, the small spark of confidence he had seen in her flickering and threatening to go out. Without a word, he began to insulate their world. He had groceries and supplies delivered directly to the ranch. He politely declined social invitations that he knew would be minefields of veiled insults and prying questions. He didn't imprison her, he protected her. He was building a fortress not of walls, but of quiet, unwavering support. A space where the venom of the outside world could not penetrate, and where her spirit might finally have the safety it needed to heal. The fragile peace was shattered by the arrival of a sleek, black automobile that roared up the gravel driveway, spitting stones in its wake. Spencer Prescott stepped out, his face a mask of arrogant entitlement. He had come not for a social visit, but for an extortion. Seeing his sister find a foothold in a new life, a life of potential happiness and influence, was an offense to his entire sense of order. In his world, Eleanor was meant to be a permanent fixture of misery, a constant reminder of his own superiority. Her escape was a betrayal, and her newfound security was a resource he was determined to plunder for his own gain. He stormed toward the house, his very presence a poison seeping into the air. He found her in the garden, the very one whose design she had helped shape. She was trimming a rose bush, a small, genuine smile on her face. The sight of it seemed to enrage him. "Playing the lady of the manor now, are we?" he sneered, his voice cutting through the tranquil afternoon. "You look ridiculous. Did you really think putting you in a big new house would change what you are?" He stepped closer, his shadow falling over her. "This is a business deal, Eleanor. Nothing more. Now you're going to go to your keeper and tell him your loving brother needs another loan. A substantial one. It's the least you can do, considering he bought you for a discount." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, dipped in the poison of their shared past. Eleanor froze, the shears falling from her hand, the color drained from her cheeks, and the light in her eyes extinguished, replaced by the old, familiar terror. She visibly shrank, her shoulders hunching as if to ward off a physical blow. The garden, which moments before had been her sanctuary, now felt like an arena, and she was once again the spectacle of humiliation. All the progress, all the fragile tendrils of hope and self-worth she had begun to nurture, shriveled under the heat of his contempt. She was 22 years old, but in the presence of her brother, she was once again a helpless child, trapped and defenseless. But Spencer was not finished. He stepped closer, invading her space, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous whisper meant only for her. "He'll get tired of you, you know. Men like him want a trophy, not a charity case. He'll realize he overpaid for damaged goods, and then you'll be right back where you started. Only this time, you'll have nothing." He gestured around the grand living area. "Enjoy the stage while you can, Eleanor. The performance is almost over." Every syllable was a ghost from her past, a confirmation of her deepest fears. She felt the floor give way beneath her, the carefully constructed walls of her new life crumbling into dust. She was drowning in the old shame, the familiar helplessness closing over her head like a cold, dark wave, and she didn't have the strength to fight it anymore. Just as a single, silent tear escaped and traced a path of surrender down her cheek, a new presence filled the room. Caleb Shaw stood in the main doorway, his large frame a silhouette against the afternoon light. He hadn't made a sound, but the atmosphere shifted instantly from cruel theatre to silent judgment. His eyes, cold as glacial ice, were fixed on Spencer. He took in the scene in a single, sweeping glance. Eleanor, broken and trembling by the fireplace, his staff, frozen in helpless horror near the hall, and Spencer, puffed up with his petty, poisonous victory. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He walked slowly, deliberately into the room, his work boots making heavy, measured sounds on the polished hardwood floor. Each step was a countdown. The suffocating silence was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. Spencer's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine animal fear. He had been tormenting a lamb, and now the lion had come home. Caleb stopped directly in front of Spencer, his sheer size an intimidating wall of muscle and barely contained fury. "Get out of my house," he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. Spencer, attempting to regain his swagger, scoffed. "I was just having a private word with my sister." Caleb's hand shot out, not in a strike, but to grab the front of Spencer's expensive shirt, lifting him slightly off his feet with effortless strength. "She is not your property to torment. She is the lady of this house, and you will never speak to her again." He propelled Spencer toward the door, with a force that sent him stumbling across the rug. "You see a transaction. You see weakness. You are so blinded by your own empty, bitter soul that you can't recognize what true value is." He turned his back on the sputtering, humiliated Spencer and faced the room, his gaze immediately finding Eleanor, who was watching him with wide, tear-filled eyes. His expression softened instantly, the cold rage replaced by a fierce, protective tenderness that was more powerful than any anger. In front of his staff, in front of the man who had tried to destroy her, Caleb's voice rang with unshakable conviction. "This woman," he declared, his voice now clear and strong, resonating with absolute certainty, "is the most valuable person I have ever had the honor to know. Her worth is not in a name or a bank account. It is in a soul so kind and a heart so strong that it survived a lifetime of you." He took a step toward her, his eyes never leaving hers. "You think beauty can be measured on a scale. Her beauty lights up every corner of this house. I love her. I love her completely." The words washed over Eleanor, a healing flood on a lifetime of wounds. "I love her completely." It wasn't pity. It wasn't a business arrangement. It was a declaration, a truth spoken with such raw power that it silenced every cruel whisper she had ever heard, both from others and from the prison of her own mind. The dam inside her finally broke, not with tears of sorrow, but with a profound, soul-deep sense of relief. She looked at Caleb, truly seeing him for the first time not as a rescuer, but as her partner, her champion. A new and unfamiliar strength bloomed in her chest. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and met her brother's shocked gaze from the doorway with an expression of pure, quiet finality. She was no longer his victim. Caleb gently took her hand. his touch a promise. Their bond, forged in a cold transaction, was now sealed in the unbreakable fire of love. Spencer's humiliating retreat left a vacuum in the room, a ringing silence where his cruelty had been. It was in that quiet that Eleanor and Caleb truly began their life together. They were married a few weeks later, not in a grand cathedral filled with the prying eyes of the Hudson Valley elite, but in an intimate ceremony on the West Terrace, beside the very rose garden whose curved path she had first imagined. She wore a simple dress of deep, vibrant blue, a color that made her eyes shine with a light he had never seen before. As they exchanged vows they had written themselves, Eleanor felt the last of the old ghosts recede. She was not a payment, not a solution to a debt, but a cherished partner, and the hand that held hers was not that of an owner, but of a man who saw the entirety of her soul and called it beautiful. In the months that followed, the Shaw Ranch bloomed with a new kind of life. Eleanor's presence, once as quiet as a shadow, became a source of warmth and light. The dark, concealing dresses were replaced with clothes of color and soft fabric that moved with her as she walked through the halls, her laughter now a frequent and welcome sound. She took over the management of the household not with the detached authority of a Prescott, but with a quiet competence and genuine kindness that earned her the fierce loyalty and affection of the staff. She had a gift for making things grow, not just the flowers in her garden, but the sense of family and joy within the home. Caleb would often come in from the fields to find her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, sharing a story with the cook, her face animated and happy, and he knew he had received far more than he had ever paid for. Her own healing became a quiet mission to heal others. Eleanor, with Caleb's unwavering support, established a foundation dedicated to providing resources and mentorship for young people struggling with bullying and low self-esteem caused by emotional abuse. She never saw herself as a victim, but as a survivor who understood the unique pain of being made to feel worthless by the very people who should have loved you most. Her story, shared with gentle honesty in small, safe groups, became a beacon for those lost in the same darkness she had once known. Sharing a story of such profound pain and recovery can be a lifeline for someone else. We are so grateful for every person who subscribes, as it is your support that allows us to bring these powerful testaments of the human spirit to light. Years later, the Shaw Ranch was more than just a successful agricultural enterprise. It was a sanctuary. On a warm summer afternoon, Caleb stood by the window of his study, watching Eleanor play with their young son in the garden. The child's laughter mingled with hers, a melody of pure, unadulterated happiness. She looked up and caught his eye, her smile radiant and full of a love that had only deepened with time. In that moment, he didn't see the frightened young woman from the cold drawing room or the bargain bride the world had tried to label her as. He saw his wife, strong and compassionate, the architect of their joy and the unwavering heart of their family. He had gone to the Prescott estate to collect a debt and had instead found a treasure of immeasurable worth, proving that the value of a soul can never be written on a ledger.